The air in the high Colorado frontier tasted of soot and iron. It was late in the year, the aspen groves already stripped bare, their white trunks standing like bones against the dark pine. The wind carried the first promise of a bitter winter, snapping at the charred bones of the stagecoach. It lay on its side near the trail, a ruined skeleton picked clean by fire and desperation. 2 of its wheels were missing, the leather traces cut, the horses long gone. The ground was a ruin of scattered luggage, torn calico, and broken crates. Near the wreckage, 3 men lay where they had fallen, their bodies already stiffening in the cold, arrows bristling from their backs. The coach itself was a blackened husk, the metal strongbox smashed open and empty. From inside the wreck, something moved. It was not a man, not whole. It was a shape of torn cloth and dried blood. Pushing aside a scorched plank, he crawled out into the gray afternoon light, his lungs burning with every breath. He was tall, built with the heavy muscle of a laborer or a fighter, but he moved like a broken animal. His shirt was in tatters, 1 boot was missing, and a deep, matted gash wept blood above his right temple. He looked at the bodies without recognition. He looked at the ransacked coach without understanding. He looked at his own hands, caked in dirt and blood, and felt no connection to them. Inside his head, there was only a great, hollow emptiness, a black void where a name should have been, where a life should have been. There was no past. There was only the wind, the pain in his skull, and a devouring thirst. He heard the faint sound of running water. Driven by the last flicker of instinct, he began to move toward the sound. He staggered through the greasewood and rocks, his vision swimming. The world tilted, the gray sky pressing down on him. He stumbled over an embankment and fell, rolling down a short, dusty incline. He landed near the bank of a creek, its water running low and clear over smooth stones. He crawled the last few feet, plunging his face into the icy water. The cold was a shock, a pain so sharp it momentarily cleared his head. He drank deeply, his body shaking with the effort. He tried to push himself up, to wash the blood from his face, but the strength left him all at once. The pain in his head bloomed into a blinding white light, and he collapsed, his face half submerged in the freezing water. Clara moved through the woods with a quiet, practiced economy. She carried an axe in one hand and a length of rope in the other, her gaze sweeping the forest floor for good. Dry firewood. She had lived alone in this remote cabin for 3 years, and she understood the mountains. She knew the language of the wind, the habits of the deer, and the precise moment when the air turned, signaling a storm that would bury the world in white. That signal was in the air now, a deep chill that settled in the bones. She needed to haul twice her usual load. She was gathering a bundle of fallen pine when she saw the birds, 2 large ravens, circling low and bold near the creek trail, not a quarter mile from her land. They were not just scouting, they had found something. A dead deer, perhaps, or something worse. Clara was a reserved woman, not given to panic, but a deep unease settled on her. She left the firewood and moved silently toward the creek, her moccasins making no sound on the pine needles. She smelled the wreck before she saw it, that same heavy odor of soot that the wind had carried. She froze, her hand tightening on the axe handle. Bandits, or a raid. She crept forward, staying behind the cover of the thick spruce trees, until she saw the ruined coach. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scanned the clearing, praying the attackers were gone. The stillness, the absolute silence save for the cawing ravens, told her she was alone. She was about to retreat, to secure her cabin and wait, when she saw the shape by the water. It was a man, unmoving, lying face down in the shallows. Her training, the hard lessons of a life that demanded action, took over. She moved quickly from the trees, her axe held ready. She approached him cautiously. He was either dead or close to it. She knelt, grabbed his shoulder, and rolled him over. Clara's breath left her body in a single, painful gasp. The world stopped. It was not possible. He was dead. She had mourned him. She had buried the idea of him 3 years ago, buried it deep under the hard-packed earth of her grief. But the face, though bearded and broken, was his. The line of the jaw, the broad forehead, the shape of his mouth under the rough hair. The scar, faint but clear, that ran through his left eyebrow. Eli, she breathed. The name was a prayer, a curse, a ghost. He was not dead. His lips were blue, his skin the color of ash, but a faint, shallow breath fogged the air. The shock held her for only a second. Then, a fierce, protective urgency seized her. She could not lift him. He was a solid, heavy man. She looked at the gash on his head, the torn clothes freezing to his skin. He would be dead in an hour. She worked with a desperate, quiet fury. She hauled him from the water, his body a dead weight, and dragged him up the embankment. It was a slow, agonizing process. Her muscles burned, her lungs heaved. She left him sheltered by the trees and ran back to her cabin. She returned not with a horse, the trail was too narrow and he could not ride, but with a small, sturdy travois she used for hauling firewood and deer. Getting him onto it was the hardest part. She grunted with the effort, her own body trembling, tears of exertion freezing on her cheeks. She did not cry from grief or joy. There was no time for that. She cried from the sheer, physical impossibility of the task. But she did it. She wrapped him in her own oilcloth cloak and began the slow, brutal drag back to the cabin. She did not look at his face again. She just pulled, her eyes fixed on the narrow path, her mind a blank wall against the questions roaring just beneath the surface. She had found him. The rest would have to wait. He woke to the smell of wood smoke and dried herbs. The world was soft, blurry, and pulsing with pain. He was warm. He was lying on a soft bed, a cot, not a bedroll, covered in heavy quilts. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting flickering orange light on low, rough-hewn beams above him. A shadow moved by the fire. A woman. He tried to speak, but only a dry croak escaped. The pain in his head was a hot spike, and he fell back into the darkness, convinced she was a dream. The next time he woke, the light was different. A pale, gray light from a single, small window. The woman was sitting in a simple wooden chair near his cot, mending something. He could see her more clearly now. She was not young, perhaps near 30. Her face was strong rather than pretty, with high cheekbones and serious, steady eyes the color of winter moss. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a severe, practical braid. She wore a simple dress of dark wool. He watched her for a long time. Her hands were capable, chapped and red, as they worked the needle and thread. He tried to speak again. "Where?" The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, he saw something raw in them. A flash of pain so deep it startled him. Then it was gone, shuddered away. She put down her sewing and rose, moving to the bedside. "You're safe," she said. Her voice was low and quiet. "You were injured. I found you." He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness and nausea crashed over him, and he fell back, groaning. "Be still," she commanded, not unkindly. She placed a cool, damp cloth on his forehead. "You have a fever and a bad wound to your head." He licked his cracked lips. "Water." She brought a dipper of cool water from a bucket by the door, lifting his head with one strong arm so he could drink. The water was life. It cleared some of the fog. Who are you?" he managed. She paused, her gaze distant. "My name is Clara." "Where am I?" "My cabin, near the Blackwood Range." None of these words meant anything to him. Blackwood, Clara, they were just sounds. He looked at the cabin. It was one small, tidy room with a sleeping loft above. A rifle rested on pegs above the door. It was a place of solitude, of survival. "The coach," he whispered, a flash of fire and smoke passing behind his eyes. "It was burned," she said, her face impassive. "You were the only one." The only one. The words settled on him, heavy and cold, but he felt no grief. He felt nothing, He felt the pain in his head and the emptiness behind it. "My name," he said, the question tearing at his throat. "Do you know my name?" Clara looked at him, and her composure, so tightly held, seemed to crack. She looked down at her hands, then back at his face. She did not answer. The silence stretched, filled only by the rising sound of the wind outside. "You need to rest," she said finally. Her voice strained. She turned away from him and went back to the fire, stirring a pot that hung over the flames. He watched her, a thread of suspicion pulling tight in his chest. She was hiding something. He drifted back into the fevered dark. In that darkness, he heard her, hours or days later, as she bathed his face again. He heard her whisper a single word, so quiet he thought it was part of the dream. Eli. When he woke again, truly lucid. The world had changed. The pale gray light from the window was gone, replaced by a strange, oppressive white glare. The sound of the wind was no longer a whistle. It was a high, thin scream, a banshee's wail that seemed to come from all directions at once. Clara was standing by the window, peering out. "What is it?" he asked. His voice was stronger. "Snow," she said, not turning. "A blizzard. It started last night." He pushed himself up on one elbow. The room spun, but it settled. The fever had broken. He was weak, aching in every muscle, but his mind was clear, and it was still empty. "How long?" "3 days," she said. "You've been in and out of fever for 3 days. The snow," he said, looking at the ice crusted on the inside of the window panes. "How bad?" "Bad enough," she replied, finally turning to face him. Her face was pale, drawn. "We are trapped. No one will be getting through these mountains for a week. Maybe more." They stared at each other. The isolation of the cabin, which had been a sanctuary, was now a cage. Later that day, after she'd given him a bowl of thin broth, he asked the question again. He had to know. You knew my name," he said. "I heard you." Clara stopped her relentless cleaning. She stood with a wet rag in her hand, her back to him. "Eli," she said. It was not a question. "Your name is Eli." The name felt strange on his tongue. Eli. It fit no better than any other. "And you know me." She turned slowly. The look on her face was not one of pity. It was something harder, something akin to grief. "Yes." "How?" he pressed, his voice rising. "Are you from my town? My family?" Clara set the rag down. She walked to the small trunk at the foot of her own bed and knelt. She opened it, the hinges creaking, and removed something. She held it in her hands for a moment before walking back to him. She did not hand it to him. She just held it out. It was a small, tin-plated photograph, its edges scorched and dark. He took it. It was a picture of 2 people, a man and a woman. The woman was her Clara, but younger, her face softer, a small, hesitant smile on her lips. The man beside her was tall, clean-shaven, wearing a suit that looked stiff and uncomfortable. He was looking at the woman, not the camera. Eli stared at the man's face. He saw the scar over the eye. He felt the same scar on his own forehead. It was him. "Who is this?" he whispered, his throat tight. Clara's voice was barely audible above the screaming wind. "It is us." He looked up, confused. "Us? We were married. Eli," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. 5 years ago. You disappeared. 3 years passed. You were declared dead." He stared at the photograph, then at her face, the lines of grief, the hardness in her eyes. It was too much. It was a trick. A fever dream. "No," he said, shaking his head. I would remember." "You were on that coach," she said, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "You were coming back?" "I don't know," he said, his voice raw. "I don't remember you. I don't remember him." He thrust the photo back at her. "I don't know who that is." "He is you." "I am nothing," he roared, the sudden anger surprising him. He was too weak to move, too weak to flee. He was trapped in this cabin with a woman who claimed his past, a past he could not feel. He saw the pain in her face, the way she flinched as if he had struck her. He was skeptical, terrified. A woman alone on the frontier might do anything, say anything, to keep a man here to protect her. But as he looked at her, he saw the tears welling in her eyes. Tears she refused to let fall. She did not look like a liar. She looked like a widow who had just seen a ghost. Her sadness was too real, too deep, to be a fabrication. He said nothing else. He was too weak to leave. He had no memory to contradict her. He had no choice but to stay. The days blurred. The blizzard raged. A white wall beyond the cabin door, sealing them in a world that consisted of one small room. The wind howled relentlessly, and at night they heard the wolves, their calls sounding unreasonably close, hungry and bold. The tension in the cabin was as thick and cold as the air outside. They were two strangers, bound by a past only one of them remembered. Eli slowly regained his strength. He could sit by the fire now, wrapped in a quilt, and he watched her. He watched her every move, searching for the lie. But her care for him was a strange torture, intimate and unsettling. It was not the detached care of a nurse. It was achingly familiar. One morning, his hair, matted with old blood and dirt, was bothering him. He tried weakly to run his fingers through it. "It needs washing," she said, her voice flat. She brought a basin of warm water and a bar of lye soap. "I will have to cut some of it away." He sat on the stool, his back to her, and tensed as she began to work. Her shears were cold against his scalp. Then, her fingers. She was gentle, her hands moving with a sureness as she washed his hair, working the soap into a lather, her knuckles grazing his neck. The touch sent a shiver through him. It was the touch of a stranger, yet his body seemed to lean into it, welcoming it in a way his mind could not understand. He felt a deep, confusing shame. When she was done, she combed it back, her fingers brushing his temples. He kept his eyes squeezed shut. She did not just feed him and tend his wound. She took his torn, bloody clothes and washed them. She sat by the fire, mending his shirt. It was a plain, blue flannel shirt, worn thin at the elbows. She stitched it with small, precise movements. Her head bent, and she brought out his old hat. It had been in the chest, a brown felt hat, stained with sweat and rain. The brim curled in a way that was uniquely his. She did not give it to him. She just placed it on the peg by the door, beside her own cloak. He could not stop staring at it. It felt like his. He knew, with a certainty that defied his empty mind, just how that hat would feel on his head. He began to dream. They were not memories. They were fragments, shards of glass exploding in his sleep. He dreamed of fire, a barn burning against a black sky. He dreamed of the smell of gun smoke, thick and acrid in his throat. He dreamed of shouting, men's voices raised in anger and fear, and he dreamed of a woman screaming, a high, terrified sound that was not Clara's. He woke one night with a gasp, his heart pounding. He was covered in a cold sweat. Clara was instantly awake. She rose from her own cot across the room, crossing the cold floor in her nightdress. "What is it?" she whispered. "The dreams again." "Blood," he rasped, his hands clenched in the quilt. "There was so much blood and fire." He looked at her in the dim light of the dying embers. He saw the fear in her eyes before she could hide it. She knew. She knew what the dreams meant. "It's the fever," she said, her voice too quick. "It's the wound, just a fever dream." "You're lying," he said, his voice low. He grabbed her wrist. Her skin was warm. "You know what I did, what I am. Tell me." She pulled her wrist free, her face hardening. "I am telling you that you are safe here. I am telling you to rest." She turned her back on him and went back to her bed, but he knew she was not sleeping. He stared at her rigid back, the suspicion in him growing into a cold certainty. She was not just his wife, she was his keeper. She was hiding him, not just from the snow, but from the world, and from himself. The silence between them grew heavier, more painful. He was stronger. He could walk the length of the cabin, though his head still spun. The snow had not stopped. It piled in deep drifts against the door, higher than the window. They were running low on firewood. One afternoon, while the storm briefly quieted to a dull roar, he sat by the fire, staring at his own hands. He did not recognize their strength, the calluses, the small white scar on his knuckle. Clara was mending one of his socks, her movements jerky, her patience worn thin by the confinement and his silent suspicion. He could not bear it any longer. "I don't believe you," he said, his voice quiet. She looked up, her needle stopping mid-stitch. "What don't you believe?" "Any of it," he said, gesturing to the cabin. To her. "The photograph, the marriage. It doesn't feel true. I look at you, and I feel nothing." The words were cruel, but they were the only truth he had. Clara stared at him. The color drained from her face. She set the sock down, her hands trembling. She rose from her chair and walked toward him. He tensed, bracing himself for anger, for tears. She did neither. She knelt before him on the cold hearthstone, so her eyes were level with his. She just looked at him, her gaze tracing the new, raw scar on his temple, the beard that covered his jaw, the eyes that looked at her like a stranger. "You feel nothing?" she whispered. She raised her hand, slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. He flinched, but he did not pull away. Her calloused, work-roughened fingers touched his cheek. Her hand was trembling. It was not the chaste touch of a nurse. It was a touch of desperate, agonizing ownership, a touch that said, "You are mine." He froze. Her touch, the scent of her, pine soap and wood smoke. It broke through the black emptiness. It did not trigger a memory. It triggered an echo, a deep, painful flicker of something lost, something vital. It hurt, a sharp stab behind his eyes. "I'm your wife," she whispered, her voice thick with a pain that matched his own. Her thumb brushed his lower lip. He stared at her, his breath caught in his chest. "You just forgot." He stiffened, the recognition and the terror warring inside him. He could not accept it. He could not deny it. He turned his face away, breaking the contact. He said nothing. He just stared into the flames. A man trapped between a past he could not remember and a woman he could not escape. The blizzard broke after 8 days, leaving the world buried in a white, blinding silence. The sky opened up, a painful, sharp blue. The snow was a prison wall, 5 feet deep in the drifts, turning the small cabin into a shallow cave. Eli felt his strength returning, but it was a restless, angry energy. The emptiness in his head remained. He was a body without past, a tool without a purpose. The woman, Clara, his wife. She moved around him with a guarded quiet, her grief a tangible thing in the small room. He could not comfort her. He did not know the man she was mourning, even as he wore his face. When the crust on the snow was hard enough to walk on, he took the axe. It felt right in his hands. The weight, the balance, the worn hickory handle. He went out into the frozen woods, the air so cold it burned his lungs. He began to chop. The rhythm of the work was a mercy. The bite of the blade into the frozen pine, the crack as the wood yielded, the thud of the logs splitting. He worked for hours, his body remembering movements his mind had lost. He knew how to read the grain of the wood, how to angle the axe, how to use his weight without wasting strength. The sweat froze on his brow, and the muscles in his back and shoulders, weak from fever, screamed in protest, then hardened with purpose. He stacked the wood by the cabin door, a bulwark against the cold. He felt useful, but not whole. He turned his attention to the small barn. The storm had torn half the shingles from the roof. He found the tools in the shed, a hammer, a box of old nails, a pry bar. They were his. He knew it. He recognized the worn grip on the hammer, the small chip in the claw. He climbed the roof, his movement stiff but sure, and began the repair. Below him, in the small corral, were 2 horses, a sturdy mare and a chestnut gelding. They watched him, their breath pluming in the air. When he was done with the roof, he went to them. The mare, a dun, shied away, Her ears flat, but the gelding, a deep red, walked right up to him. It nudged his chest, snuffing at his coat, looking for a treat. "Hey, boy," Eli whispered. The horse lipped at his glove. A jolt, sharp and quick, went through him. A name, Rowan. He knew this horse. He looked at the gelding, truly seeing it. "Rowan," he said, "louder." The horse tossed its head, a soft wicker of recognition. Clara had come out of the cabin, a shawl wrapped tight around her. She was watching him, her face pale. "You remember him," she stated. It was not a question. Eli ran a hand down the gelding's neck, his fingers trembling. I know his name. I don't know how." "He was yours," she said, her voice soft. "You raised him from a colt. You said he was the only thing, besides me, that you trusted." He looked from the horse to the woman. He could remember the animal. He could not remember his wife. The guilt of it was a physical sickness. He turned away from her, his throat tight, and grabbed the pitchfork. He began to muck out the stalls with a desperate, furious energy. The routine was grounding. He chopped wood. He mended the broken corral fence. He fed and watered the horses. His body grew stronger. The wound on his head scabbed over, leaving a tender, puckered scar. But his mind remained a snow-covered field, empty and white. A week later, a rider approached. Eli was splitting logs when he heard the jingle of a harness. He looked up, his hand dropping to the axe handle, his body tensing. He had a sudden, sharp instinct to hide, a coiling in his gut that screamed of danger. Clara came to the cabin door. "It's all right," she called out, though her voice was strained. "It's just Silas, from town." The man rode up on a big bay mule, his face hidden behind a thick, frosted beard and a heavy buffalo coat. He stopped, his gaze moving from Clara to Eli, sharp and curious. "Clara," he grunted, touching the brim of his hat. "Made it through the storm. I see. Heard you had trouble." "We're fine, Silas," Clara said, stepping partly in front of the door. "Just low on flour." Silas's eyes lingered on Eli. "Trouble's what I'm here about. That stagecoach wreck, down on the creek trail, it was bad. Looked like a raid, but nothing was right. Arrows, yes, but the box was smashed with a smith's hammer. And the bodies." He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the snow. "Found 3, but the waybill said 4 passengers, plus the driver and guard." Eli felt Clara's stillness. He kept his own face blank, his gaze fixed on the axe head. "We ain't seen anyone," Clara said, her voice a little too flat. "Well, keep that rifle handy." Silas said, "There's talk of bandits, renegades from the war still roaming, men who ain't right in the head. They're saying the group that hit the coach was led by Butcher Ellis. You heard of him?" Eli felt nothing. The name was just a sound. But Clara went rigid. Her knuckles, clutching her shawl, were white. "Just stories. Silas." "Maybe," he said, his eyes narrowing again on Eli. "This your kin?" Eli looked up, meeting the man's gaze. "My cousin," Clara said quickly. "From back east. He was caught in the storm. Took sick." "Cousin, huh?" Silas grunted. He looked Eli up and down, taking in the torn clothes, the rough beard, the scar. "He don't look like your side of the family." "He's not well. Silas. Now. About that flour?" Silas finally broke his stare. "Right. I brought a sack and some salt pork. Figured you'd be low. Put it on your account." He swung his leg over, his gaze sweeping the cabin, the new mended roof, the stack of firewood. "Your cousin's a hard worker, I'll give him that." "He does what he can," Clara said, after Silas had unloaded the supplies and ridden away. The silence he left behind was heavy. Eli followed Clara inside. He stood by the door, the cold air rolling in off his shoulders. "Butcher Ellis," he said. Clara flinched, her back to him as she put the flour sack away. "That's who they're looking for," he pressed. "Is that—" "No," she said, her voice sharp. "That's not you. That's a ghost story, a name they give to a man they never caught." "And who did they catch?" She turned to face him, her eyes dark. "You don't need to know. It won't help you." "Telling me I'm your husband didn't help," he retorted. his frustration rising. "Telling me I'm your cousin. You lied. You lied to him, and you're lying to me." "I am protecting you," she cried, her voice finally breaking. "I am protecting what we have." "We have nothing," he shouted, gesturing around the small room. "We have a cabin and a lie. I don't know you. I don't know myself. I wake up in sweats from dreaming of fire, and you tell me it's the fever. You look at me like you're terrified. Are you terrified of them? Or of me?" Her face crumpled. She sank into the chair by the hearth, her hands covering her face. He had broken her. The sight of it hollowed him out. He stood there, useless, an anchor of a man, dragging them both down. That night, she spoke. The fire was low. The wind had picked up again, moaning around the eaves. Eli sat on his cot, oiling a harness strap, the smell of the leather and oil filling the room. "It was the war," Clara said, her voice so low he almost didn't hear her. She was staring into the embers. "It changed everyone. It broke something in you." Eli stopped his work. "You were a good man," she whispered. "You were a farmer's son from Ohio. You believed in the Union. You believed in doing right. But what you saw, the things they made you do." She shook her head. "When you came back, you were different, quiet, haunted. You couldn't sleep. You couldn't bear to be around people." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "My father forbade me from seeing you. He said you were damaged, but I didn't care. We ran off. We eloped. We were headed west, to Oregon, to start new where no one knew your name." She got up and went to the small chest. She took out the scorched tin photograph. This time, she gave it to him. He held it. He looked at the face of the young man, the one smiling at her. There was no shadow in those eyes. No butcher. "What happened?" he asked. "We made it as far as the Nebraska territories. We were saving up to join a wagon train. You were working for a freight company, and then you vanished." She was twisting her apron in her hands. "It was 3 years ago. Your wagon was found, attacked. They said everyone was killed. They never found your body, but they presumed you dead. They held a service for you." Eli studied her face in the firelight. He saw the truth in her eyes, the raw, unhealed wound of that loss. "So you came here," he said, trying to piece it together. "To hide." "To be alone," she corrected. "I couldn't go back home. I couldn't go on without you. This was as far as I got. I've been here almost 2 years, just waiting to die." "I suppose. You waited," he said, the question burning in him. "You waited 2 years, and then you gave up, you stopped looking." The question was harsher than he intended. It was an accusation. She broke. The tears she had held back for so long finally came, silent and agonizing. She sank to her knees, her shoulders shaking. "Yes," she sobbed into her hands. "I gave up. I searched. I spent every cent we had. I followed rumors. I went to forts, to towns, to prisons. I asked about a tall man with a scar. No one had seen you. After 2 years, I couldn't do it anymore. The hope was killing me. So I came here. I let you go. I buried you." She looked up at him, her face wet, her eyes ravaged. "And then, God help me, I found you by the creek. I found you, and you're not him. You're a stranger, and I am so tired." He had no answer. He had no comfort to give. He was the ghost that had come back, only to haunt her all over again. The next day, the wind returned with a vengeance. A new blizzard, fiercer than the first, slammed into the mountains. It howled, a solid wall of sound and ice, plunging the cabin into a perpetual twilight. They were trapped again. But this time, the air was different. Her confession, his doubt. It had broken the dam. The tension was no longer one of suspicion, but of raw, exposed nerves. They were two people in a box, holding their breath. They moved around each other, their tasks small and repetitive. He cleaned the rifle he didn't remember loading. She kneaded bread with a desperate energy. On the second night of the storm, the cabin was freezing. The wind found every chink in the logs. Clara sat by the hearth, wrapped in a quilt, her face drawn, to break the oppressive silence. Or perhaps just to soothe herself, she began to hum. It was a simple, sad tune, a melody that felt old and worn. Eli, who was reinforcing the leather strap on the cabin door, froze, his hand stilled. The tune, she must have seen his reaction because her humming faltered. Then her voice, soft and hesitant, picked up the words, "The sun is sinking in the west. The bird is sleeping in its nest. Go to sleep, my love, and rest. Go to sleep, go to sleep." His fingers began to tremble. He did not recognize the song. He did not know the words, but a low sound vibrated in his chest, and he realized, with a shock, that he was humming a harmony, a deep, resonant counter-melody that wove perfectly around her voice. He stopped, his breath catching. Clara stared at him, her eyes wide, her hand covering her mouth. You remember?" "No," he said, his voice rough. He felt a tremor in his fingers. "I don't, it came out. It was your mother's," she whispered, tears welling again. "You sang it to me, every night. When you couldn't sleep, you sang it to me." He looked at his own trembling hands. It was worse than not remembering. It was this echo. His body remembering a love his mind rejected. It felt like a betrayal. The storm raged. The small cabin grew colder. The wood he had chopped, though stacked high, was finite. They had to conserve it, keeping the fire to a low bank of coals, just enough to keep from freezing. The small tasks of survival became intimate. They had to melt snow for water. The tub in the corner, normally used for laundry, became their only way to bathe. The water was precious, heated one pot at a time. "You need to wash," Clara said, her voice practical, though her eyes avoided his. "The wound, it needs to be clean." He was grimy with sweat from his work, his hair matted. He nodded, stripping off his shirt. The scar on his head was healing, but the skin around it was raw. She filled the tub with a few inches of lukewarm water. It was barely enough. He stepped in, the metal cold against his feet, and crouched, splashing the water over his chest. He felt awkward, exposed. "You're back," she said, her voice tight. "I need to check the stitches I took out." He turned, his back to her. He heard her approach. He tensed, expecting the touch of a nurse. But her fingers, when they traced the healing gash on his shoulder blade, another injury he didn't remember, were hesitant. "It's healing clean," she said. She took the soap and a rag. "Let me," she whispered. He braced himself. Her hand, holding the rag, moved across his shoulders. The touch was light, practical, but then the rag moved lower, over the muscles of his back, down to his waist. He was all coiled steel and tension. He heard her breath catch. He turned slowly. She was standing right there, closer than she had been since she touched his face. Her own face was flushed from the steam and the firelight. A strand of dark hair had come loose from her braid and clung to her damp cheek. He looked at her, not as his wife, not as a stranger, as a woman. He saw the pulse fluttering in her throat. He saw the loneliness in her eyes, a mirror of his own. His hand, the one that knew how to split wood and calm a horse, came up. It acted on its own. He did not tell it to move. He gently brushed the damp strand of hair from her cheek. His thumb grazed her skin. It was so soft. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch for a fraction of a second. Her lips parted. He leaned in. He could smell the lye soap on her skin, the scent of bread and something else. Something uniquely her. Their lips were an inch apart. He saw her tremble, waiting. The shame crashed over him. It was a cold, violent wave. He was a fraud. He was a hollow man, touching a woman who was mourning a husband he could not be. He was taking advantage of her grief, her isolation. He snatched his hand back as if burned. He stood up abruptly, water splashing onto the floor. "I can't," he rasped. His voice choked. I'm not him." He grabbed a towel, his hands shaking, and turned his back to her, scrubbing at his skin with a rough, punishing motion. He heard her let out a small, broken sound, and then she fled, climbing the ladder to the small sleeping loft, pulling the heavy quilt over the opening, sealing herself in the dark. That night, the cold became unbearable. The wind drove the temperature down into something deadly. The fire was just a handful of glowing red eyes in the hearth. Eli lay on his cot, shivering, the blankets pulled up to his chin. He could hear, even through the wind, the sound of Clara's teeth chattering from the loft. He could not let her freeze. "Clara!" he called out. His voice was lost in the wind. "Clara!" The quilt above moved. Her pale face peered down. "You'll freeze," he said, his own voice shaking with cold. "Come down, by the fire. We have to share the blankets." He saw her hesitation. It was not modesty. It was fear. Fear of him. Fear of the rejection. "It's practical," he said, his voice hard. "Just for warmth, or we won't see morning." She descended the ladder, clutching her quilt. She was shivering violently. He moved to the far side of his cot, the one against the wall. He laid his back against the cold logs. "Get in." She hesitated, then slid under the covers, her body as far from his as she could get, her back to him. The small cot was barely wide enough for one. They were pressed together, though they tried not to be. The silence was absolute, broken only by the shriek of the storm and the sound of their breathing. He lay rigid, staring into the dark. He could feel the heat coming off her body. He could smell her hair. It was torture. He was exhausted, but sleep was impossible. After an hour, she was still shaking. Her shivering was a violent, constant tremor that shook the cot. "This is foolish," he growled. He was angry at the cold, at the storm, at himself. "We have to—" He rolled onto his side, facing her back. "Turn over." She didn't move. "Clara, for God's sake, we're going to freeze." Slowly, she turned to face him. In the faint, gray light from the snow outside, he could see the glint of tears on her cheeks. She was so cold. Instinct, older than memory, took over. He pulled her against him. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her small, shivering body into the curve of his, tucking her head under his chin. He threw his quilt over both of them. She was rigid at first, a block of ice. Then, with a small, shuddering sigh, her body yielded. She curled into him, her frozen feet seeking the warmth of his legs, her hand resting hesitantly on his chest. The desire that coiled in him was not the hot shame of the bath. It was something different. It was a deep, aching current of comfort, of rightness. This, his body knew. This fit. He held her, his own shivering easing as their shared warmth built a small cocoon. He resisted. He kept his hand still, his breathing even. He was just a source of heat, nothing more. But as the hours passed, his resolve softened. His hand, resting on her back, moved. It slid down, tracing the curve of her spine, and settled on her waist. It was a simple, possessive, familiar gesture. His thumb rubbed a small circle against the wool of her nightdress. He felt her breath catch. She didn't pull away. She pressed closer. He felt it, the past, the man he was, the man who knew how to hold this woman. He leaned down, his lips brushing the hair at her temple, and then he retreated. The guilt and fear rushed back, cold and sharp. He was a man with no name, a man they called Butcher. He had no right to this comfort, no right to this woman. He was a hollow shell, and he was filling himself with her love, a love he had not earned. He pulled his arm away. He shifted, putting a small, cold space between them. The loss of contact was instant and brutal. He heard her breath hitch, a tiny, wounded sound in the darkness. They lay like that for a long time, not touching, the cold seeping back in. "You deserve a man who remembers you," Eli whispered into the darkness. His voice was rough with guilt. "A whole man, not this." He felt her turn, her face close to his in the dark. He could feel the warmth of her breath. "I don't need memory," she replied, her voice fierce and shaking. I need you. The silence that followed her words was a fragile, frozen thing. They lay in the dark, not touching, the small space between them a canyon of ice. I need you, she had said. But Eli had no answer. He was a man with two names, Eli and Butcher, and neither felt like his own. When morning came, gray and cold, the tension was unbearable. Clara moved about the cabin with a brittle, wounded grace, her eyes shadowed, her face pale. She did not speak of the night before. She did not look at him. He could not stay. He could not sit by the fire, mending a harness, while a ghost named Butcher Ellis haunted the edges of the room. He could not look at this woman, who claimed him so fiercely, and feel nothing but a hollow ache. He needed answers, not from her, but from the world that had named him. He pulled on the mended shirt. He grabbed the heavy coat she had cleaned. "Don't go," she said, her voice flat. She was standing by the hearth, her back to him. "There is nothing for you in that town, nothing but trouble." "What kind of trouble?" he challenged, his voice rough. "The kind that gives a man a name. I need to know. Clara, I need to know what I did." "I told you. It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," he said. He went to the door and took down his hat. He put it on. It fit perfectly. "I'm taking the gelding." "Eli, please," she begged, finally turning. Her eyes were wide, desperate. "Listen to me. They are not good people. They won't understand. Just stay here. Stay with me. We can start again." "Start what?" he demanded. "A life based on a lie? You tell me I'm your husband. That man Silas tells me I'm a killer. I need to know which one is true." "Both could be true," she whispered, her voice breaking. His hand froze on the door latch. He looked at her, a cold dread creeping up his spine. "What does that mean?" She wouldn't meet his gaze. "It means the man I married is not the man the world sees." "I'll be back," he said, his voice hard. He pulled the door open, letting in a swirl of frigid air, and walked out. He saddled Rowan, his movements quick and angry. The horse was steady, familiar, a comfort. He swung into the saddle and did not look back at the cabin. He pointed the horse toward the trail that led to town, a trail he instinctively knew. The town was a hard-bitten handful of buildings crouched in a valley, a muddy main street carved between a general store, a blacksmith, and a two-story saloon with a false front. It was a place built of raw lumber and desperation. As he rode in, men stopped their work to watch him. Their faces were grim, bearded, their eyes suspicious of any stranger. He felt naked, his torn clothes, the scar on his head, the haunted look he knew must be in his eyes. He was a target. But he kept riding. He dismounted in front of the saloon, the silver garter, and tied Rowan to the hitching post. He pushed through the bat-wing doors. The saloon was dark, thick with the smell of stale whiskey, unwashed bodies, and wood smoke. A dozen men lined the bar or sat at rough-hewn tables. They all looked up when he entered. The talking stopped. The only sound was the clink of a glass as the bartender polished it. Eli walked to the bar. He felt every eye on him, a physical weight on his shoulders. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, a heavy man with a stained apron. The bartender grunted, poured a shot from an unlabeled bottle, and slid it toward him. Eli put a coin on the bar, one of a few he'd found in the pocket of his mended trousers. He took the glass. His hand was steady. He could feel the stares. He turned, leaning his back against the bar, and surveyed the room. "That's a long way to ride for a drink, stranger." A voice called from a corner table. 3 men sat there, playing cards. One was a burly man in a buffalo coat. One was a younger, thinner man with nervous eyes. The one who had spoken was older, with a graying beard and a Union Army coat, faded and worn. Eli said nothing. He raised his glass and drank. The whiskey was raw, burning a trail down his throat. "You look familiar," the man in the army coat said, leaning forward. His chair scraped on the floor. "Like a man I was told to look for." "I've got that kind of face," Eli said, his voice low. The man stood up. He was tall, gaunt, and he walked with a slight limp. He stopped a few feet from Eli, his eyes scanning him from head to foot. He looked at the scar. "You took a knock," the man said. "But I never forget a face, not one like yours." The saloon was dead quiet. "I saw you at Antietam," the man whispered, his voice full of a sudden, sharp hatred. "After the fight, in the cornfield, and I saw you again in Nebraska, near the Platte. You weren't wearing that blue coat then." Eli felt his heart hammer against his ribs. "You're mistaken." "Am I?" The man's face twisted. "I lost my pension because of you. My whole company did. You and your damn renegades. You stole it. The payroll." The man's hand dropped to the holster on his hip. "Butcher Ellis." He spat the name. "Thought you were dead. Heard you drowned in a flash flood. Guess the devil don't drown his own." The name hit Eli like a physical blow. "Butcher Ellis, the man Silas had mentioned. It was him." "I don't know who you're talking about," Eli said, his voice strained. He put the empty glass down on the bar. "Liar!" the man shouted. He drew his pistol, but he didn't aim it. He pointed it, his hands shaking with rage. "You're a deserter, a thief, a damn butcher. You turned on your own. You killed good men. Put that away, Amos." The bartender growled. "Not in here. He don't deserve to breathe." Amos hissed. His eyes locked on Eli. "There's a bounty on your head, Ellis. $500, dead or alive." Eli looked at the faces in the room. He saw no help, only a cold, calculating curiosity. They were measuring him, weighing the risk against the reward. "I'm not the man you're looking for," Eli said, his voice dangerously quiet. He pushed himself off the bar. "I'm just passing through." "You're not passing anywhere," Amos said, taking a step closer. Eli moved. It was not a thought. It was an instinct. His left hand shot out, grabbing the barrel of Amos's gun, twisting it upward. His right fist, hard as iron, drove into the man's gut. Amos folded with a wet gasp. Eli didn't stop. He brought his elbow down hard on the man's back, sending him to the floor, and wrenched the gun from his loosening grip. He stood up, breathing hard, the pistol now in his hand. He aimed it at no one, just holding it, a dark, heavy weight of familiarity. The saloon was frozen. "I don't want trouble," Eli said, his voice a low growl that he didn't recognize. He backed toward the door, his eyes sweeping the room. "I'm leaving." No one moved. He pushed through the doors, walking backward, and fumbled for Rowan's reins. He untied them, swung into the saddle, and dug his heels into the gelding's flanks. He rode out of town at a hard gallop, the name echoing in his head with every hoofbeat. Butcher, butcher, butcher. He rode Rowan hard, pushing the horse through the snow-choked trail, his mind a storm of fire and blood. When he reached the cabin, he didn't slow. He burst from the saddle before the horse had even stopped, and kicked the cabin door open. Clara was on her knees by the hearth, scrubbing the floor. She screamed, scrambling to her feet, her hand at her throat. "You knew," he roared, stalking toward her. He was shaking, the memory of the saloon, the hatred in that man's eyes, burning in him. "You knew all of it." "Eli, you're bleeding," she whispered, seeing a small cut on his knuckle. "Damn the blood!" he yelled, sweeping a tin cup from the table. It clattered against the wall. "They called me Butcher, Butcher Ellis, a deserter, a murderer, a man with a $500 bounty on his head, and you let me sleep in your bed." "Stop it," she cried. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know what he said. He said I stole a payroll. He said I killed good men." He grabbed her shoulders, his grip desperate. "Is it true? Tell me. Damn you. Is it true?" Her face was a mask of pain. She couldn't lie. Not now. "Yes," she whispered, the word a surrender. "But not like that. Not the way they tell it." "How then?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "How is it not like that?" She pulled away from him, her hands twisting in her apron. She backed away until the hearth was at her back, as if seeking the warmth of the small fire. "You were a soldier," she began, her voice low and trembling. "You fought in the war. You led a militia. Good men. You saw things, atrocities." As she spoke, the images that had haunted his sleep began to sharpen. They burst behind his eyes, vivid and terrible. He saw a farmhouse, burning against a gray sky. He smelled the smoke, the roasted. He shut his eyes. They ordered you to do things," Clara continued, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "To burn crops, to clear civilians. You saw what they did at a field hospital. Men, our own men, murdering prisoners who had surrendered. He saw it, the flash of a blade, a man in a gray uniform, his hands up, begging. You broke," she whispered. "Something in you snapped. You and your men, you couldn't be a part of it anymore. You deserted. But you didn't just run. You decided to fight back. In your own way. You went after the payrolls. The money that was feeding the war machine. The officers who gave those orders. You stole from them. You gave some of it to the families whose farms they'd burned." "I was a thief," he rasped, sinking onto the stool. "You were a man trying to find justice in a world gone mad," she insisted. "I never judged you for it. I knew you. I knew the man inside, the man who sang to me, the man who cried when he saw a dead deer. And the bounty?" he asked, his voice dead. "They wanted to make an example of you," she said. "They couldn't have a hero of the Union turning outlaw. They painted you as a monster, a butcher. They hunted you." The final piece clicked into place. "The fire, the shouting, the wreck," he said. "The stagecoach. That wasn't the first time." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, 3 years ago, they cornered you and your men in a box canyon. It was a setup. A new memory, sharp and terrifying. Gunfire, the whine of a ricochet, her face." "You were there," he whispered, horrified. "I was there," she confirmed, her voice breaking. "I was bringing you supplies. I was going to beg you to run, to finally come with me. I arrived in the middle of the firefight. You faked your death. You used dynamite to block the pass. And you fell into the river. I saw you go under." He remembered the water, the suffocating, icy blackness, the roar of a canyon flood. "I tried to get to you," she sobbed. "I ran along the bank for miles. But the water, it was a flash flood. It took you, it tore you away from me. I searched until the soldiers came. I hid. I watched them find the bodies of your men. They never found you. They declared you dead, drowned. And I believed them. I believed them for 2 years." The full, crushing weight of his past slammed into him. He was not Eli, the simple man mending a roof. He was Butcher Ellis, a renegade, a wanted man, a killer. And this woman, this stranger who had nursed him, had known it all. The shame was so profound it turned to poison. It turned to rage. "You lied to me," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. He stood up. I omitted," she stammered. "I wanted to protect you." "Protect me?" he roared, his control shattering. "Or trap me? You found me, a broken man, a man with no name, and you thought you could just— What, keep me, hide me here, pretend the butcher didn't exist? You didn't tell me who I was. You told me who you wanted me to be. You manipulated me." "No, that's not true." "Isn't it?" he sneered, the cruelty a shield for his own agony. "You needed a man, a protector, and I was convenient, an empty slate you could write your own story on. I'm your wife. You left out the part about me being a wanted killer." "How could I tell you?" she screamed, her own pain matching his. "How could I look at you, broken and feverish, and say, 'Welcome back, Eli. The world wants to hang you'? I was giving you a chance to heal, a chance to be your Eli." He shot back. "Not the man I really am. You were ashamed of me." That broke her. She stared at him, her face slack with shock and a grief so profound it stole his breath. And then she slapped him. It was not a weak, hysterical slap. It was the full force of her body, a crack that echoed in the small cabin. His head snapped to the side, the sting sharp and clear. He turned back to her, stunned. She was not angry. She was destroyed. Her hand was at her mouth, her eyes wide with the horror of what she had done and what he had said. "Ashamed?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I loved you. I loved all of you, the farmer, the soldier, the outlaw. I loved you enough to search for 2 years. I loved you enough to give up everything." She backed away from him, her eyes never leaving his, as if he were the monster he claimed to be. "You," she choked on a sob. "You are not him. He would never say that." She fumbled for her cloak on the peg by the door. She didn't grab her gloves or her hat. She just ripped the cloak down, threw it over her shoulders, and wrenched the door open. "Clara!" he yelled, the fog of his rage starting to clear, replaced by a sudden, sharp panic. "Leave me alone," she sobbed. "Just leave me alone." She ran out into the gray afternoon, into the falling snow. He stood by the door, his cheek stinging. He watched her figure disappear into the swirling white. He did not go after her, not at first. His shame, his anger, his guilt, they were a leaden weight, rooting him to the spot. He told himself she would be back. She was strong. She knew the woods. She was just angry. She would cool off and return. He shut the door. The cabin was silent, deadly silent. He paced. He went to the fire and kicked the log. He saw her scrubbing brush on the floor and picked it up, his hand crushing the bristles. He was the butcher. He had taken her grief and twisted it into a weapon, and he had gutted her with it. The afternoon faded. The gray light outside the window turned to a deep, bruised purple, then to black. The snow did not stop. The wind began to howl. The same high-pitched scream that had trapped them before. She did not return. A new kind of fear, cold and sharp, cut through his confusion. He lit a lamp, his hands shaking. He looked at her chair. He looked at her cot. He was alone. He went to the window, rubbing a clear circle on the frosted pane. Nothing but a wall of white, a furious, churning darkness. He remembered his dreams, the flashes of her face, drowning, the cold water, the flood. "I lost you again." The panic became unbearable. She was out there, in that, with no gloves, no hat, just a cloak, because of him. "Clara," he breathed. He ripped his coat from the peg, pulled on his hat, and grabbed the lamp. He burst out of the door, into the blizzard. "Clara!" he roared. The wind tore the name from his lips. He couldn't take the horse. Rowan would be useless in the deep. Fresh drifts. He had to walk. He followed the shallow depressions of her footprints, already filling with snow. They led away from the cabin, toward the creek, the same creek where she had found him. He plunged through the snow, which was already over his knees, the lamp casting a small, frantic circle of yellow light. "Clara!" he called until his throat was raw. The wind was a physical blow, driving ice into his face. He shielded the lamp with his body, terrified it would go out. He found her. She was not far. She had made it to the creek bed, perhaps seeking shelter from the wind, and had either fallen or collapsed. She was huddled at the base of a large, snow-covered pine, a small, dark shape against the white. "Clara!" He ran, stumbling through the deep drift, and fell to his knees beside her. She was covered in a layer of snow. He brushed it off, his hands rough. She was shivering, a deep, racking tremor that shook her whole body. "Clara, look at me." He lifted her chin. Her face was blue-white in the lamplight. Her lips were gray. Frostbite was already claiming her cheeks. Her eyes opened, but they were dull, unfocused. "Cold," she whispered. I lost you. I lost you again." "No," he said, his voice thick with a sudden, terrible clarity. "The amnesia, the anger, the bounty. None of it mattered. Only this. No, you didn't. I'm here." He looked at her, so fragile, so cold. This woman who had crossed a continent for him, who had searched for him, who had saved him, and he had driven her out. He lifted her into his arms. She was so light. She let out a small, pained sound and curled into his chest. He held her tight against him. "If I forgot you," he whispered, his voice breaking, pressing his face into her freezing hair, "then God help me. I want to remember every damn thing. The good, the bad, all of it. I don't care. Just don't leave me." He carried her back to the cabin, fighting the wind, his own body a shield against the storm. He kicked the door shut, the wind slamming it behind him. He carried her straight to the hearth and set her down gently on the bearskin rug. "The fire," he muttered, his hands clumsy. He threw log after log onto the embers, fanning them into a roaring blaze. Clara just shivered, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. "We have to get you warm," he said, his voice urgent. "These clothes, they're frozen." He knelt beside her. His hands, rough and calloused, went to the buttons of her cloak. He fumbled with them, his fingers stiff with cold and panic. He ripped the frozen cloak away. Her wool dress beneath was damp and stiff with ice. "Clara, I have to," he said. She gave a small, delirious nod. He worked gently now, his urgency tempered by a desperate tenderness. He unfastened the small buttons at her throat, his knuckles grazing her icy skin. He pulled the dress off her shoulders. He removed her wet underthings, his movements as respectful as a doctor's, but his hands lingered. He saw the blue tint of her skin, the raw red patches on her hands and feet. She sobbed, a low, exhausted sound, as the heat from the fire began to touch her skin, turning the cold to a deep, burning ache. He chafed her hands between his own, blowing hot breath onto her fingers. "I'm sorry," he whispered, over and over. "I'm so sorry, Clara." He stripped the quilts from his cot and wrapped her in them, cocooning her. He held her, rocking her gently, her head resting on his chest. He could feel the violent shivering begin to ease, replaced by a finer tremor. She looked up at him, her eyes clearer now, and filled with a profound, aching sorrow. She didn't pull away. She didn't fight. She just watched him. He looked at her mouth, her lips still pale, her face stained with frozen tears. He had to warm her. He had to share his own heat. He shed his own coat and wet shirt, his skin steaming in the firelight. He pulled her, wrapped in the quilt, onto his lap, and then slid with her under the heavy blankets, pulling them over both of them. He pressed his warm, bare chest against her back, wrapping his arms around her, pulling her tight. "I've got you," he murmured. "I'm right here." She turned in his arms, her movements slow, exhausted. She turned to face him, the quilt pooling around their waists. Her skin was still so cold. Her hands came up, hesitantly, and rested on his chest. "Eli," she whispered. It was not a question. It was a statement. He looked at her. The firelight played over the strong lines of her face, the moss-green eyes, the mouth he had almost kissed. The desire he had felt before was back, but it was no longer a thing of shame or confusion. It was urgent. It was aching. It was a desperate animal need to prove they were both still alive, to burn away the cold and the past. His hand came up, cradling her jaw. His thumb stroked her cheek, warming the skin. "Clara." He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of memory. It was a kiss of raw, immediate need. Her lips were cold, but they parted under his, and he tasted the salt of her tears. She let out a small, broken sound, and her hands clenched on his shoulders, pulling him closer. It was slow, and it was desperate. He laid her back on the rug, the fire warming their skin. His hands moved over her, not with the memory of a husband, but with the discovery of a survivor. He memorized the line of her collarbone, the curve of her waist, the feel of her skin. She sobbed in his arms, not from grief, but from the release of it, from the sheer, overwhelming relief of being touched, of being held by the man she had lost. Even if he was a stranger, this was not the tender reunion of a long-lost love. It was raw, it was clumsy, it was real. It was two broken people, clinging to each other in a storm, trying to find a single, solid piece of ground. When he moved inside her, she arched against him, her nails digging into his back, her eyes squeezed shut. It was a grounding, a desperate anchor in the black void of his mind. He was not Butcher Ellis. He was not a ghost. He was here. He was flesh. And he was with her. The past, with its blood and fire, faded. The bounty, the saloon, the accusations, they dissolved. There was only the heat of the fire, the rasp of their breath, the scent of her skin, and the undeniable, physical proof that they were alive. Touch, in that moment, became more powerful than memory. The great white silence was broken by the sound of running water. The world, which had been frozen for so long, began to weep. Snow melted from the pines, dripping from the eaves of the cabin in a steady, rhythmic percussion. The creek, once a frozen ribbon, roared with the release of the thaw. The smell of the air changed. It was no longer the sharp, sterile bite of ice, but the rich, complex scent of damp earth, of pine resin, and of life returning. For Eli and Clara, it was a resurrection. The cabin, once a refuge and then a cage, became a starting point. They moved with a new, shared purpose, their bodies still learning the language of each other, their days filled with the hard, grounding labor of rebuilding. The corral fence, snapped and buried by the deep drifts, was their first task. They worked side by side, digging out the posts, their hands raw from the cold, wet wood. He would set the post, his muscles straining, and she would stand ready with the hammer and spikes. They spoke little, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was a comfortable quiet, punctuated by the ring of the hammer, the grunt of effort, the shared breath in the chill air. When the fence was mended, they turned to the garden plot. The ground was rocky, the soil thin. It had been her small patch, but now it was theirs. He took the heavy pickaxe, a tool he knew as well as his own hands, and broke the earth. He cleared the stones, his back a solid wall of muscle, while she followed behind with a rake, smoothing the soil. Her hands, once chapped and red, now strong and brown. In these long days of work, there were moments that ambushed him. Once, he was splitting a felled aspen for new fence rails, and the sharp, clean scent of the white wood flashed a memory behind his eyes. A winter, long ago, building a rabbit hutch, a woman's laughter, Clara's laughter. Another day, they were planting. She had secured seeds from Silas, beans, corn, and hardy greens. She was pouring the small, precious seeds into his palm, and the light, dry rattle of them brought a sudden, sharp image. Clara, standing in a dusty wagon, her face streaked with tears, her voice choked. "Don't go! Eli, don't leave me!" It was the day he had left to join the freight company, the day his old life had ended. He stopped, his hand closing on the seeds, his breath caught in his chest. "What is it?" she asked, her gaze quick and concerned. I remember you crying," he said, his voice rough. "You were wearing a blue dress. You told me not to go." She stared at him, her hand still poised over the seed bag, her eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She just nodded, a slow, painful acknowledgement. "I did," she whispered. "I told you it was a bad feeling. You said it would only be for a few months." He held her gaze. It was another piece, another stone laid on the foundation of the man he had been. He did not say anything more. He just turned and began to plant the seeds. They fell into a rhythm. They ate together, worked together, and at night, they slept together. The small cot was gone. They shared her bed now, their bodies tangled for warmth and for a comfort that went deeper than memory. The act of love was no longer the desperate, raw claiming of the storm. It was quiet. It was tender. It was, in its own way, a prayer. One evening, she fell asleep before him, exhausted from a day of hauling river stones to build a new fire pit. She lay on her side, the firelight catching the brown and red tones in her hair. He sat on the stool, watching her. He was overwhelmed by a feeling so powerful it almost suffocated him. It was not just desire. It was a fierce, painful tenderness. He remembered her hair, He remembered the smell of it on their wedding night. She had washed it with lemon verbena soap. He had buried his face in it, and he had promised her the world. Quietly, he rose, young. He took his skinning knife from its sheath. He walked to the heavy beam that ran above their bed. It was rough-hewn, scarred by the axe that had shaped it. He stood on the small chest. By the faint light of the fire, he began to carve. The wood was hard, seasoned pine. His hand was steady. He cut deep, the blade sure and practiced. He carved one letter, then another. When he was done, he stepped down. The firelight caught the fresh-cut grooves in the wood. Clara. He ran his fingers over the name. He remembered the promise he had made to the man in the scorched photograph. I'll build you a home. Clara, a real one, with a porch. I promise. He had failed. He had brought her nothing but ruin, but he had carved her name into the heart of this cabin. He was claiming it. He was claiming her. This was their home. The fragile peace lasted until the high mountain passes were clear of the deepest snow, until the trail to the world was truly open. We need flour, Clara said one morning. And salt? We're almost out. Eli nodded. He had been dreading this. I'll go. No, she said, her hand grabbing his arm. Not you. Let me, or I'll send a list with Silas. I can't hide forever. Clara, he said gently. It's been weeks. I'm just a man buying flour. Your cousin. Your face is not a cousin's face, she said, her voice sharp with fear. It's the face they're looking for. They won't have forgotten. I have to, he insisted. We can't live on what Silas decides to bring us. We need to be strong. We need supplies. He saw the argument in her eyes, the terror, but she also saw the resolve in his. He was no longer the hollow man she had found. He would not be a prisoner. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Be careful, she whispered. Ride in, get what you need, and ride out. Don't talk to anyone. He rode Rowan into town, his hat pulled low, his gaze sweeping the street. The town was busier now, with the thaw. Wagons, muddy to their hubs, were parked in the street. He saw new faces. He tied Rowan outside the general store and went in. Silas was there, behind the counter, weighing beans for a miner. Clara needs flour, Eli said, his voice low, placing the coins on the counter. And salt, and coffee, if you have it. Silas grunted, his eyes flicking over Eli, but he said nothing. He turned to get the flour. That was when Eli saw them. Two men were standing by the stove, drinking coffee from tin cups. They were not locals. They wore new denim, clean hats, and matching Colt revolvers, strapped low on their hips. They were clean-shaven, their eyes cold and watchful. They looked like professionals. One of them was pinning a piece of paper to the notice board. A new one. Clean and white. Eli's blood went cold. Got a problem out here, the taller one said to Silas. His voice was flat, with a Texas drawl. Looking for a man. Calls himself Butcher Ellis. You know the name? Silas shrugged, tying off the flour sack. Heard stories. Ain't he dead? Drowned? That's what they said. The shorter man chimed in. Turning, he had a mean, pinched face. But the U.S. Marshals say different. Seems he was spotted, and the bounty's been raised. $700. Now, paid by the Union Pacific. $700. Silas whistled, his gaze sliding toward Eli, then away. That's right, the tall man said. He looked straight at Eli. His eyes were the color of ice. Looking for a tall man, broad shoulders, dark hair, got a scar through his left eyebrow. Seen anyone like that? Friend? Eli met his gaze. The store was silent, save for the buzz of a fly near the window. Eli felt Silas's fear, the miner's sudden interest. Can't say I have. Eli said. His voice was even. He put his hands on the counter, next to his coins. I'm just here for supplies. The man's gaze lingered, sharp and assessing. He looked at the scar on Eli's temple, the one from the stagecoach, and then his eyes drifted up to his brow. Eli didn't flinch. Right. the bounty hunter said, turning back to the stove. Well, you keep your eyes open. $700 makes a man's memory a whole lot better. Silas pushed the sacks toward Eli. That's all, then? That's all. Eli said. He paid, loaded the flour onto his shoulder, and walked out. He did not look back. He could feel their eyes on his back all the way to the horse. He rode Rowan at a steady pace, not running, not giving them a reason to follow. But the fear was a living thing, a cold knot in his stomach. He had been seen, he had been measured, and he had been recognized. When he got back to the cabin, Clara was waiting by the door. She saw his face, and her own went white. They're here, he said, dropping the sack by the door. Bounty hunters, 2 of them, in the store. Did they described me, to my face. They offered $700 for Butcher Ellis. Clara let out a small, strangled sound and sank onto the stool. They know. Silas knows. The whole town will know. She looked up, her eyes wild with the old panic. We have to go, tonight. We'll pack what we can. We'll ride north. We can get to the territories, maybe Canada. No. The word was quiet, but it stopped her cold. What do you mean, no? She demanded. Eli, they will hang you. I'm done running, he said. He knelt in front of her, taking her trembling hands in his. I ran from the war. I ran from myself. I've been hiding in my own empty head for months. I'm not running from my own home. This isn't a home. It's a trap, she cried, pulling her hands free. They will come here. They will come here and they will kill you, and they will call it justice. Then they'll have to, he said, his voice hard with a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. I will not be run off. Clara, not from you, not from this. He touched the wall, his hand near the beam where he had carved her name. This is my life. I've already lost it once. I won't just give it away. It's not giving it away. It's living, she pleaded. It's not, he said. It's surviving. It's what you did for 3 years. It's a living death. You said it yourself. I'm not going back to that. And I'm not dragging you with me. He stood up, towering over her, a man made of stone. I am done running. If I am to die, I die with you beside me. Here. She stared at him, her face a mask of love and terror. She knew he meant it, and she knew he was right. 3 days later, another rider came. This man was different. He was not a bounty hunter. He was not a local. He rode a fine black gelding, and he sat in the saddle with an easy, educated posture. He was a black man, in his late 40s, wearing a clean duster and carrying a doctor's bag strapped to his saddle. Eli was chopping wood when he heard the horse. He stiffened, the axe in his hand, his eyes on the trail. Clara came out of the cabin. She froze. Then, a name burst from her. A sound of such profound relief it stunned Eli. Tobias! She ran. She ran to the man and he dismounted, catching her in a firm, respectful embrace. Clara, my child, you look worn. Tobias, thank God, she whispered, clinging to him. I came as soon as I got your letter, he said. His voice was deep and clear, with the precise articulation of a learned man. He looked over her shoulder at Eli, his gaze sharp and intelligent. I see you found him, or he found you. This is Eli, Clara said, pulling back, her hands on the man's arms. Eli, this is Dr. Tobias Cole. He's my oldest friend. From before, he was my father's physician. Eli nodded, lowering the axe. He did not offer his hand. He was still wary. He's a brave man. You're Eli, Tobias said, his eyes not leaving Eli's. Walking into a town that's hunting him. You're either a fool, sir, or you're tired of living. How did you know? Eli asked. I stopped in town. I heard the talk in the saloon. 2 hunters, $700, and a man at the general store who fit the description. Tobias said. It was not hard to put together. May I come in? The ride was long. That night, they sat by the fire. Tobias was a calming presence, but his words were dire. You have two choices, he said, stirring his coffee. You can wait for them to come. They will. Greed is a powerful motivator, and $700 is more than most men in this town will see in 5 years. Someone will tell them, Silas, the miner, anyone. Or, Eli asked. Tobias looked at Clara, his face sad. Or you disappear, properly, this time, not a failed escape in a flood. A death, a real one. What do you mean? Clara asked, her voice trembling. I am a doctor. Tobias said simply, I have access to things. I have connections. Men who owed me favors. There is a body in my wagon, under the ice. A man from a mining camp. No family, killed in a cave-in. He matches your husband's size. Eli and Clara stared at him, horrified. We take him. Tobias continued, his voice a low monotone. We put him in this cabin. We burn it. We burn it to the ground. A lamp. Knocked over. A terrible accident. The body will be charred. Unrecognizable. But the scar on your head, he nodded at Eli, will be on his. I will see to it. I will be the one to discover the body. I will sign the death certificate. Butcher Ellis dead, Clara, a grieving widow. The bounty hunters will collect their money, and they will leave this valley forever. And Eli? Clara whispered, her hand gripping Eli's. Eli will be gone, Tobias said. He will ride north tonight. He will have a new name, a new history. He will go to the Washington territories, to a town where I know people. He will start a new life. Tobias leaned forward, his face etched with grim reality. But he will never come back. He will never write. He will never see you again. To the world, to this valley, and to you. Clara, he must be dead. It is the only way you will ever be safe. It is the only way he will ever be free. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Eli looked at the beam above their bed. He looked at the garden plot outside. He looked at Clara, a life without her. It was the same as the amnesia, a black, hollow void. But it was a life. It was safety for her. He was considering it. He was actually, truly considering it. He could do that for her. He could give her that. He could set her free from the monster he had been. No! Clara's voice was sharp. She stood up, her small frame rigid. Clara, child, be sensible, Tobias said gently. No, she repeated, her voice shaking with a cold fury Eli had never heard. I will not bury him again. I will not live a lie, safe and empty. I did that. I waited for 2 years. And then I gave up. I spent a year here, alone, just rotting. I will not go back to that. She turned to Eli, her eyes blazing, all the fear gone, replaced by a terrible, bright certainty. I would rather live 1 month with you, truly loved, knowing they are coming, than spend a lifetime waiting for a man who is never coming home. I would rather die with you than live without you. Eli looked at her. He saw the woman who had crossed the frontier, the woman who had survived alone, the woman who had pulled him from the creek. He stood and took her hand. He looked at Tobias. I'm staying. Tobias studied them both for a long moment. He saw their resolve. He saw the love that was stronger than the fear of death. He sighed, a deep, heavy sound, and nodded. I see, he said. He looked old and tired. Then God help you both, because they will come. Tobias left before dawn, taking the grim contents of his wagon with him. He left them with laudanum, bandages, and 2 extra boxes of cartridges for Eli's rifle. That night, there was no sleep. The air in the cabin was charged, not with fear, but with a strange, breathless clarity. They knew what was coming. The if had been replaced by when. They lay in the bed, tangled in the quilts, the fire casting low, flickering shadows on the beam above them. His hand rested on her stomach, her back pressed against his chest. They were 2 bodies, 1 heart, waiting. He kissed her shoulder, his lips brushing her skin. He felt her hand cover his. You never stopped being mine, she whispered into the darkness, her voice thick. Not when you were at war, not when you were an outlaw, Not even when you forgot. You were always mine. Eli, you just lost your way home." He pulled her closer, his arm a band of steel around her. He said nothing. He just held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, and stared at the name he had carved in the wood. A silent vow in the face of the coming dark. The rumors spread through town like a sickness. It began in the Silver Garter, a poisoned whisper from the two bounty hunters. It was fed by the miner who had been in the general store, his eyes wide as he recounted the confrontation. It was confirmed by Silas, who, cornered and afraid, finally admitted that the woman in the mountains, the quiet widow Clara, was harboring a man. The name Butcher Ellis was on everyone's lips. A deserter, a murderer, a man worth $700. And the woman, the reclusive widow, was suddenly a harlot, an outlaw's woman, a traitor to the memory of the Union men her lover had supposedly slaughtered. Women who had once nodded to her in passing now crossed the street, clutching their children's hands. Men looked toward her cabin with a new, dark speculation. Her reputation, the only currency she had, was burned to the ground. This new ugly energy in the town reached the ears of Sheriff Brody. He was a man who preferred to let the high country keep its secrets. But the arrival of a stern, uniformed Union marshal named Croft changed that. Croft was not a local. He was a man of cold law and old grudges, sent from the territorial government with a singular purpose: to clean up the last, lingering messes of the war. "You have a wanted fugitive in your jurisdiction, Sheriff," Croft stated, his voice flat as he unrolled the new warrant in Brody's dusty office. "The bounty is a civil matter. This," he tapped the paper, "is a military one. You will execute this warrant, or I will." The pressure was too much. Brody, his face grim, signed the paper. A quiet arrest warrant was issued, but there was nothing quiet about the intent behind it. Tobias Cole rode Rowan hard, the horse's flanks lathered. He reached the cabin not an hour before the posse was set to ride. "They're coming, Eli," he said, not dismounting, his voice urgent. "Brody, the marshal, and those hunters, they've deputized a dozen men. You have to run, now!" Clara was already inside, throwing bread, ammunition, and a blanket into a saddlebag. "We'll go north," she said, her voice tight, her hands shaking. "The high passes, they won't follow us into the deep snow." Eli stood by the hearth, his rifle in his hand. He looked at the beam where he had carved her name. He looked at her face, pale and terrified, but resolute. He saw the town in his mind's eye, the way they would look at her, the names they would call her for the rest of her life. The woman who ran with the butcher. "No," he said. "Eli, this is not the time for pride." Tobias snapped. "This is survival." "She can't run," Eli said, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on Clara. "If she runs with me, she's an outlaw. She's whatever they say she is. She'll never be clean again. She'll never be safe." "I don't care," Clara insisted, shoving the bag at him. "I don't care about my name. I only care about you." "I care," he said. He took the bag from her hands and set it on the table. He walked to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I'm the ghost. I'm the one they want, not you. You are a citizen. You are the woman who found a lost man. You are innocent. I will not let them take that from you." "What are you saying?" she whispered, her hands clutching his shirt. "I'm turning myself in." "No!" Her cry was a physical blow. "No, I will not let you. They will hang you." "They will hang me if they catch me running," he said, his voice gentle but unbreakable. "If I walk in, if I surrender, I'm not a wolf. I'm a man. It gives you a chance. It gives us a chance. To talk, to tell the truth. They won't hang a man who walks in on his own 2 feet. Not without a trial." "He's right, Clara," Tobias said, his voice heavy with reluctant understanding. "Running makes him guilty. Surrender, that's a different move. It's a risk, a terrible one. But it's the only one that saves your name." Eli kissed her forehead. "I'm protecting you, the way you protected me. I'm done hiding." He took his rifle and walked out of the cabin. He unloaded it and handed it, stock first, to Tobias. "Keep this for her. She'll need it." He mounted Rowan and rode down the mountain, alone. The town of Blackwood Forks went silent when he appeared. He rode slowly down the center of the muddy street, his hands in plain sight. Men stopped, their mouths open. The bounty hunters, standing on the saloon porch, drew their weapons, their eyes wide with disbelief and greed. "That's him!" the taller one yelled. Eli ignored them. He rode straight to the sheriff's office and dismounted. Sheriff Brody and Marshal Croft came out, their guns drawn. Eli raised his hands, palms open. "I'm Eli Ellis," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet. "I hear you're looking for me." The bounty hunters rushed forward, but Croft held up a hand. "He's a military prisoner. Gentlemen, your bounty will be paid on confirmation of capture." Eli looked at Brody. "I'm surrendering to you, Sheriff, not to him." Brody, his face a mask of conflict, nodded. "Put your hands behind your back. Son." They took him inside. The bounty hunters crowded the door, their faces ugly. Eli saw them take the $700 from the marshal's safe. They had their money, whether he was alive or dead. They put him in the back cell. It was a stone box, cold and damp, with a single high window barred against the sky. They did not just lock the door. They chained him to a ring in the wall, the heavy iron cuffs biting into his wrists. Clara arrived an hour later, her face a storm of grief and fury. She burst into the sheriff's office, her hair wild. "What have you done?" she demanded, slamming her hands on Brody's desk. "What the law required. Clara," Brody said, not meeting her eyes. "He's a wanted man. He's an injured man. He lost his memory. He doesn't even know what he did. You can't hold him responsible." "That's not for me to decide." Brody sighed. "It's the marshal's case now. A military tribunal." "A tribunal? That's not a trial. That's a hanging." She spat. "You know those men. You know what they call him. You're a coward. Sheriff, you're letting them murder a man to save your own skin." "That's enough," Marshal Croft said, stepping out from the back. "Your association with the prisoner is already a crime. Madam, I suggest you go home and pray for your own soul. You will not be seeing him." "He's my husband," she said, her voice dropping, filled with a sudden, cold iron. Brody and Croft stared at her. "He was presumed dead." Brody said, "He was lost." Clara corrected, "And I found him?" "He is my husband, and you are holding him. I have a right to see him." "You have no rights here," Croft said. He opened the door. "Go home, or I'll put you in the cell next to him." Clara stared at the marshal, her hatred a palpable thing. She turned, her back straight, and walked out. She found Tobias at the livery, tending her mare. "They won't let me see him," she said, her voice breaking. Tobias finished brushing the horse and hung the currycomb. "No, they won't, but I can." "How?" "A man in chains is a man who might harm himself," Tobias said, picking up his black bag. "It is my duty as a physician to check on the prisoner's health, especially when a military court needs him alive to hang. He got her in that night. The deputy, a young man named Pike, was nervous. Tobias spoke to him in low, soothing tones, explaining that the prisoner needed his wounds checked, his head examined. Clara, he explained, was his assistant. Pike hesitated, then unlocked the corridor. 10 minutes, doctor, and she stays back. He's chained, but he's the butcher." The smell hit her first, damp stone, stale sweat, and despair. Eli was in the back cell, sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, the chains taut. He looked up as they approached, his face shadowed. He had a fresh bruise on his cheek. "Clara," he breathed, surging to his feet. But the chain snapped him short. She rushed to the bars, tears streaming. "They hurt you." "One of the hunters," he said, his voice rough. "When the sheriff was gone, it's nothing." She reached through the bars, her hands finding his. His hands were raw from the cuffs, bruised from the hunter's blow. She brought his chained hands to her lips and kissed the iron, kissed the bruised knuckles. "I will get you out," she whispered fiercely. "I swear to you, Eli, I will not let them do this." "Clara, no," he said. "It's done. You have to be safe. You have to let me go. I let you go once." She sobbed. "I buried you. I will not do it again. Tobias is working on something. We will get you out." "10 minutes, doctor," Pike called from the hallway. "I love you," she whispered, pressing her cheek against his rough ones through the bars. "I love you, Eli Ellis. You remember that. You remember me." "I remember," he said, his own voice thick. "Clara, I remember your hair. On our wedding night. It smelled of lemons." She pulled back, her eyes wide, a new, desperate hope lighting her face. "Time's up," Pike said, his boots loud on the stone. Tobias gently pulled her away. "Be strong, child, be strong." The next day, a new man arrived in town. He wore an expensive Eastern suit and a derby hat, but his eyes were hard and knowing. He walked into the sheriff's office, presented papers to the marshal, and was granted immediate access to the prisoner. He stood before Eli's cell, a small, superior smile on his face. "Well, Eli," he said, "you've found yourself a deep hole." Eli looked up. The face was familiar, the weasel-like features, the shifty eyes. "Jonah, you're a long way from Nebraska." "So are you," Jonah said. He had been part of Eli's militia, the quartermaster, the man who always knew where to find supplies, or where to sell them. "I heard you drowned. Seems we were both wrong. What do you want, Jonah?" Eli asked, his voice flat. "I'm here to offer you a way out. I work for the government now. The war's over. Eli, it's time to pay the bill." Jonah leaned closer, his voice dropping. "The marshal, he just wants a body to hang. He wants the butcher, but his bosses, they want something more. They want the network, the families who hid us, the men who supplied us, the names. Eli? The ones who are still out there." "You're an informant," Eli said, the disgust thick in his throat. "I'm a survivor," Jonah countered, his smile vanishing. "And you can be, too. Give me the names, a list. I'll take it to the marshal. He gets his victory, and you get a full pardon. You walk out of here. You can go back to that woman of yours. Live a long life." Eli looked at the man who had eaten at his fire, who had fought beside him. "There's no honor in what you're doing, Jonah." "Honor?" Jonah laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Honor died at Antietam. Honor died in that prison camp you were so righteous about. This is just business. So, what is it? Your life, or the ghosts of men who are already dead?" Eli looked at his chained hands. He thought of the farmers who had given them shelter, the women who had baked them bread. He thought of his own men, dead in that canyon. Betraying them was not a pardon. It was a different kind of execution. He lay back down on the cold floor and turned his back to the bars. "Get out," he said. "You're a fool. Eli, you'll hang." "At least I'll hang clean. Get out." Jonah stared at his back for a long moment, his face dark. "Have it your way, butcher." The execution was set for dawn. There would be no trial. The tribunal was a formality. A piece of paper signed by Marshal Croft. Clara was a woman possessed. She went to Tobias. He refused the deal. "How do you know?" Jonah was in the saloon, drinking, bragging about how he offered the butcher a way out, and the fool spat in his face. "He's leaving on the morning stage." She grabbed Tobias's arm. "He hangs at sunup. We have no time." "Your words, they didn't work," Tobias said grimly. "My words? I petitioned the town council," he said, "called an emergency hearing. I made them listen. I told them about his amnesia, about his injury. I told them this was not the man they were hunting. And nothing. Croft has the authority. The town's fear is greater than its conscience." "No," Clara said, a new, cold fire in her eyes. "Not the town, just the council. The people haven't spoken. I will make them speak." She walked out of the doctor's office and into the main street. She climbed onto the broad porch of the general store, the same spot where the bounty hunters had posted the warrant. She held a broken piece of a crate in her hand and banged it on the wooden pillar. "Listen to me," she shouted, her voice ringing in the cold afternoon air. People stopped. "Listen to me." A crowd gathered, the miners, the shopkeepers, the women. They saw the widow, the outlaw's woman, and they stared, hungry for the spectacle. "You all know me," she began, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "I am Clara Ellis, and I am the wife of the man you are about to let be murdered." A murmur went through the crowd. "He's a killer," someone shouted. "He was a soldier," she shouted back, silencing them. "He was a hero. He fought for the Union. He fought for you. And he saw things that broke him. He saw the hypocrisy of men who profited from death, who ordered atrocities and called it duty." She pointed a finger at the president of the town bank, standing at the edge of the crowd. "Mr. Harrison, where did the money come from to build your bank?" "War contracts, selling hardtack at 10 times its value to the very army Eli fought for." She pointed at another man. "And you, Mr. Silas, you sell guns and whiskey to both sides, don't you? Whoever has the coin." The crowd was stunned into silence. "You call him butcher because it makes you feel clean," she cried, her voice breaking with passion. "But he is a man. He was lost. He was wounded. He lost his memory, his past, his name. The man you have in that jail is not the butcher. He is Eli, a man who mends fences and chops wood, and who turned himself in to save my name. He is a man who loves—" "Does a butcher do that? Does a monster walk into his own execution?" She looked at the faces, the stunned, ashamed, angry faces. "This isn't justice. This is a lynching. And if you let it happen, if you let that marshal hang him to satisfy an old grudge, then his blood is on all of you. You will be no better than the hypocrites who started that war." She stood there, shaking, breathless, having fired her last shot. The town was silent. No one moved. She had stunned them. She had exposed them. But she had not saved him. She saw Marshal Croft watching from his office window. His face was unmoved. That night, the town was quiet, too quiet. A heavy fog rolled in, blanketing the buildings. Tobias met Clara in the alley behind the livery. He was not dressed as a doctor. He was dressed for riding. "Your speech was magnificent, child," he whispered. "It shamed them, but it did not stop the marshal. They are building the gallows now." Clara's face crumpled. "Then it's over." "No." He pushed a warm, heavy bundle into her hands. It was a loaf of cornbread, wrapped in cloth. "It is not over." She looked at him. "The deputy, Pike," Tobias said, his voice low and fast. "Your speech, it reached him. His older brother died at Gettysburg. He is not a killer. He is a boy in a uniform. He will be asleep, very deeply asleep. I gave him a strong sedative for his nerves." Clara's hand went to her mouth. "The key is in the bread." Tobias said, "The lock on his cell, not the corridor. The corridor door will be open. You have until the changing of the guard, at 3 in the morning. That gives you 2 hours. I have the horses, Rowan and the mare, saddled and waiting in the woods, a mile north of the creek. You're not coming? I am a black doctor in a white town that is about to lose its prized prisoner," Tobias said grimly. "I will be the first person they suspect. No, I will be here. I will be loud. I will be indignant. I will be the one who discovers the escape. It is the only way to buy you time. Now go. One last meal for the condemned man." She moved like a ghost through the fog. The jail was silent. As Tobias had promised, the young deputy was slumped over his desk, his breathing heavy. She slipped past him, into the cell corridor. The main door was ajar. She ran to Eli's cell. He was on his feet, waiting, as if he knew. "Clara," he breathed. "Quiet," she whispered, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the bread. She passed it through the bars, The key, in the middle. He tore the bread apart. His fingers found the cold, heavy iron key. He jammed it into the lock. It was stiff. He put his entire body into it, turning. The click of the lock was the loudest sound she had ever heard. He pulled the door open and stepped out. He did not pause. He grabbed her hand. The back way. They slipped out the small back door of the jail, into the foggy alley. They ran. They ran through the dark, silent town, toward the woods, toward the creek. They made it a half-mile before the bell began to toll. He woke up. Eli growled. "The guard! Run!" They heard shouts, a gunshot. The alarm was raised. They found the horses, their breath pluming in the cold, and scrambled into the saddles. Eli took the rifle from the scabbard. "Ride for the high rocks!" They burst from the trees, pounding through the shallow creek, just as the posse, led by the bounty hunters and Marshal Croft, thundered onto the trail. "There they are!" a voice roared. Gunfire exploded behind them. The bullets sang through the air, whizzing past their heads like angry hornets. They rode hard, Rowan and the mare leaping up the rocky path into the mountains. Clara screamed. Eli turned. "Are you hit? My arm! It's just a graze!" she gasped, clutching her shoulder. Blood, dark in the moonlight, was seeping through her sleeve. The sight of her blood ignited something in him. The cold, precise instinct of the man they called Butcher. "Ride on," he commanded. "Get behind that ridge. I won't leave you." "Do it," he roared. She obeyed. He reined Rowan to a halt, turning the horse broadside. He raised the rifle, his arm as steady as stone. He was not the man from the saloon, fighting for his life. He was the soldier, protecting his land, protecting his wife. He saw the flicker of a muzzle flash below. He fired. A man screamed. A horse went down. He fired again. The tall bounty hunter's hat flew from his head. The man dove for cover. "Come on," he yelled, digging his heels into Rowan, scrambling up the rocks after Clara. They were in the wild hills now, a maze of stone and pine. They were almost clear. Another shot. Eli felt it, a white-hot punch in his side, a force that stole his breath and threw him forward onto Rowan's neck. "Eli!" Clara screamed. He held on through the pain, through the sudden, dizzying wave of blackness. He rode for another 5 minutes, his body slumping, his strength failing. They reached a small, hidden plateau, surrounded by high rocks. He slid from the saddle. He did not land on his feet. He collapsed, a dead weight, onto the cold ground. "No!" Clara sobbed, jumping from her horse, running to him. He was pale, his eyes closed, the front of his shirt a dark, spreading stain of blood. "Eli! Eli, stay with me!" She tore his shirt open. The wound was low in his side. It was deep. It was bad. She pressed her hands to it, trying to stop the bleeding, her own grazed arm forgotten. She was shaking, her body seized by a terror worse than any she had ever known. He was dying. She had saved him from the gallows, only to lose him to a bullet. His eyes flickered open. He looked at her, his gaze unfocused. "Clara," he whispered, his hand coming up to touch her face, his fingers smearing her cheek with his own blood. "Don't you dare," she whispered, her voice a low, shaking growl, her tears falling onto his face. "Don't you dare leave me. I will not bury you again. You hear me? Don't you dare leave me again." He woke to the smell of blood and pine. The pain was a living thing, a white-hot river of fire burning from his side, consuming his entire body. He tried to move, but a moan was the only result, a dry, cracked sound that died in his throat. "Be still." The voice was an anchor in the storm of pain. "Clara." He forced his eyes open. The world was a blur of green and gray. He was not on the rocky plateau. He was under a crude lean-to of pine boughs, lying on a bed of soft needles and blankets. A small, smoky fire struggled against the damp air. "Clara," he breathed. She was kneeling beside him, her face a mask of exhaustion, her skin pale and smudged with soot. Her left arm was bound in a crude sling, her sleeve stained with her own dried blood. I'm here, Eli, she whispered, her voice rough. She brought a damp cloth to his forehead. It was cold, a small, shocking mercy. You're safe. They stopped following. He tried to sit up, a memory of the fight, the bullets, her scream, pushing through the fog. The pain in his side exploded, a blinding flash of white that stole his breath and sent him back into the darkness. His life became a fevered, disjointed dream. He was drowning in the cold, black floodwaters of the canyon. He was in the cornfield at Antietam, the air thick with the smell of iron. He was in the jail, the heavy chains cold on his wrists. And through it all, there was Clara's voice, a steady, constant presence. "Drink this," she would command, her hand lifting his head, the bitter taste of willow bark tea on his tongue. "You are not leaving me," she would whisper into the long, cold nights, her voice a fierce, trembling prayer as she packed snow and moss against the raging infection in his side. "I will not allow it. You hear me, Eli? You will not leave." She was a creature of desperate, relentless care. She had dragged him from the plateau, half carrying, half pulling his dead weight for miles, deeper into the uncharted wilderness of the high mountains. She had found this sheltered overhang of rock, hidden by a curtain of ancient spruce. She had built the shelter. She had started the fire. She hunted with the rifle, her wounded arm making every shot an agony, bringing back squirrels and grouse, which she boiled into a thin, hot broth. She tended his wound with a knowledge born of a hard life. She had sterilized his skinning knife in the fire and, with her teeth gritted, had cut the bullet out of him herself. She had packed the weeping hole with the laudanum-soaked bandages Tobias had given them, and when those ran out, she used poultices of yarrow and pine sap, things a frontier woman knew by instinct. For weeks, he teetered on the edge. The infection raged, and the fever held him in its grip. He was a ghost, a hollowed-out man of sweat and pain. Clara slept in short, fitful bursts, her hand on his chest, as if she could physically hold his life in place by the force of her will. One morning, after a night of terrible, shaking chills, he woke, and the fever was gone. The world was sharp again. The pain was still there, a deep, heavy throb, but the fire was out. He saw Clara asleep by the fire, her head resting on her knees, the rifle across her lap. She looked thin, almost brittle, her face carved with new lines of strain. The scar on her grazed arm was a raw, red line. He tried to move, to reach for her. The movement, small as it was, sent a jolt through his side. He grunted. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, her hand instantly on the rifle. She saw him, truly saw him, his eyes clear, his gaze lucid. "Eli?" she breathed, afraid to hope. "Hey," he whispered. His voice was a stranger's, a dry rasp. The relief that washed over her was so profound it was like a collapse. The rifle clattered to the ground. She crawled to him, her face crumbling, and buried her head in his shoulder, her body shaking with silent, racking sobs. It was the first time she had allowed herself to break. He lifted his hand, his arm impossibly heavy, and laid it on her hair. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." His recovery was slow. He was a strong man, but the bullet had taken much from him. He had to learn to walk again. The first time he stood, supported by Clara and a rough-cut crutch, his left leg, the one on the side of the wound, buckled. The muscles had been damaged, the nerves scarred. "I can't," he gasped, clinging to her. "Yes, you can," she said, her voice like steel, her small frame taking his weight. "You will. Walk, Eli. Walk." He did, every day. He walked, from the lean-to the fire, then to the edge of the trees, then to the small spring that gave them water. He walked with a heavy, dragging limp. The easy, powerful grace of the man who had ridden Rowan was gone, replaced by a hitch, a permanent, painful reminder of the price of their freedom. Clara, too, was marked, her arm healed, but the bullet had torn the flesh, leaving a puckered silver scar on her forearm. They were a pair of broken, mended things. They could not stay in the lean-to. Winter was coming again, and they would not survive it exposed. They needed a home. One day, a shadow fell over their camp. Eli, his hand on the axe that was never far from his side, looked up. A man was standing at the edge of the clearing, leading a tired mule. It was Tobias Cole. Clara cried out his name, a sound of pure joy. "I was not sure I would find you," Tobias said, his face grim, but his eyes kind as he looked at them. He took in Eli's gaunt frame, the heavy limp, the cabin-made crutch. "It seems I am late, but not, thank God, too late." He had not come alone. Behind him, on 2 more mules, were a woman and a young boy. His wife, Sarah, a tall, strong woman with a face as steady and kind as his own, and their son, Isaiah, a boy of about 10, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder at the wildness of the mountains. "They burned my office," Tobias explained, as they sat by the fire, sharing the last of Eli's broth. "The night you escaped, the marshal, when he found you gone, his rage was absolute. He turned on the town. Your speech, Clara, it had shamed them, and that made him furious. He accused me of aiding you." "Did they?" "They had no proof," Tobias said. "But proof is not required for a mob. They saw me as the root of their shame. They came with torches. We left with what we could carry." "They are outcasts," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm, as she looked at Clara. "Just like us. They were a community of survivors, a doctor, a soldier, and their wives. A world of experience and resilience, high on a mountaintop, with nothing but their hands and their will. They found their home a mile higher, in a small, hidden valley the Ute had once called Sun in the Bowl. It was a high meadow, protected on all sides by sheer granite cliffs, with a deep, clear lake fed by snowmelt, and a stand of thick timber. An old trapper's cabin, crumbling and rotten, stood near the lake. They did not repair it. They tore it down and built a new one. It was hard, brutal work. Eli, despite his limp, was the builder. He taught Tobias and young Isaiah how to fell the trees, how to read the wood. He could not lift the heavy logs, but he could show them how to cut, how to notch, how to use the leverage of a rope and mule to raise the walls. His body was broken, but his mind, his knowledge, was whole. Clara and Sarah worked beside them. They chinked the logs with mud and moss, their hands raw and cracked. They built a large stone fireplace, their greatest treasure. They cleared a patch of land, the richest soil they could find, and planted the small hoard of seeds Tobias had saved. The first winter was a test. They were cut off from the world, a tiny island of life in an ocean of snow. They survived on the deer Eli and Tobias hunted, on dried beans, on the hardy potatoes and squash they had managed to grow. Eli taught Isaiah how to track, how to read the snow, how to be silent in the woods. Clara and Sarah taught the boy to read, using the one book they had saved, a thick volume of Shakespeare that Tobias had carried in his bag. They were no longer defined by the past. They were not the butcher, or the widow, or the outcast doctor. They were Eli, Clara, Tobias, Sarah, and Isaiah. They were a family. Peace was not a thing that came all at once. It was a slow-growing plant. It was the quiet of the winter nights, the only sound the wind and the crackle of the fire. It was the first green shoots in their spring garden. It was the sound of Isaiah laughing as Eli taught him how to carve a whistle from a piece of willow. Eli's limp was a part of him now. He moved with it. He worked with it. It was a scar, just like the one on Clara's arm, a mark of where they had been. But it did not define him. His memories had returned, not in a flood, but in a slow, steady trickle. He remembered the war. He remembered the rage, the injustice. He remembered forming his militia. He did not feel shame. He felt a great, heavy sadness for the man he had been, for the choices he had been forced to make. But when he looked at Clara, when he saw the home they had built, the past was just a story. It was not his life. One evening in high summer, the valley was filled with the scent of pine and the sound of the crickets. It had been nearly 2 years since they had come to the valley. The cabin was sturdy, the garden was thriving. They had 2 goats and a handful of chickens. It was a real home. Eli told Clara they were having dinner outside, by the lake. She was confused. It was a normal night, but she put on her one clean dress, the blue one she had saved, and went down. He had built a small fire on the shore. He had not picked wildflowers. He had, instead, carved her one, a perfect 5-petaled wild rose, carved from a piece of aspen, so smooth it felt like silk. "What is this, Eli?" she asked, her voice catching as he gave it to her. "I made you a promise once," he said, his voice low. "A long time ago, I promised I would build you a home. This is it. It's not much, but it's ours, and I don't think we ever did it right." She looked at him, confused. Did what right? He turned. Tobias was walking down from the cabin, wearing his one good suit jacket. Sarah and Isaiah followed, the boy carrying his father's medical bag. "Tobias," Eli said, "if you would." Tobias smiled, a deep, warm expression. He took the heavy Bible from the bag. He stood before them, the lake turning to molten gold in the setting sun. "Clara," Eli said, turning to her. He took both her hands. His were calloused, scarred, one leg slightly bent. Her hands were just as rough, her scar a pale silver line in the fading light. We were married in a hurry," he said, his voice thick. "Running from your father. Then I lost myself. And you found me. I think we deserve to start this proper, here, in our home, with our family." Tears streamed down Clara's face. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They stood before Tobias, the crickets and the wind their only music. "Dearly beloved," Tobias began, his voice deep and clear, ringing out over the water. "We are gathered here, under the eyes of God and in the heart of his wilderness, to join this man and this woman." He spoke of survival, of loyalty, of a love that had refused to die, and then he turned to them. Eli spoke first. I don't have words. Clara, you know what I was. You know what I am. You took a ghost and you gave me a life. You gave me my life back. I was a man lost in the dark, and you were the only light I will never forget again. I will spend every day I have left making this a home worthy of you." Then it was her turn. She looked at him, at the man she had loved through everything, the farmer's son, the soldier, the outlaw, the broken stranger, and now, her husband, whole and new. "Eli," she whispered, her voice shaking with the weight of it all. "I loved you when you were a soldier. I loved you through war, and I loved you through lies. I loved you when you forgot me. I loved you enough to bury you, and I loved you enough to pull you back from the dead. Now, just love me in peace." "I will," he said. "Then," Tobias said, his own eyes wet, "by the authority vested in me by God, and by the simple truth of what I see before me, I pronounce you," again, and finally, "man and wife." Eli cupped her face. He looked at her, truly seeing all the years, all the pain, and all the strength. He was not afraid. He was not forgetting. He was home. He kissed her, deeply, slowly. It was a kiss of promises kept, of a future earned. It was a kiss of absolute peace. The sun was setting. They sat on the small porch of the cabin they had built with their own hands. The air was cool, the sky a blaze of orange and deep purple. Eli leaned his chair back against the log wall, his leg propped up on the railing. He watched Isaiah and Tobias down by the lake, skipping stones. Clara sat beside him in a rocker, her hand resting on his knee. They were quiet, comfortable in the silence they had earned. They were weathered. His limp was permanent. Her scar was a part of her. They were worn, like the mountains, but just as solid. "It's a good life," he said, his voice quiet. He covered her hand with his own. "It is," she agreed. "It's the one we were supposed to have." He felt her hand move from his knee. She took his rough, scarred hand and placed it on her stomach. It was soft, and there, just beneath the surface, he felt a slight, firm curve that had not been there before. He looked at her, his breath catching. She did not say anything. She just looked at him. Her eyes, those same green eyes that had seen him through fever and war, shining with a new, quiet light. A small, sure smile touched her lips. He stared at her, the truth of it dawning on him. A sunrise after a long night, a child, a new life, a beginning. Born not of the past, but of this, of their peace. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, unburdened smile, the one she had not seen since before the war. He leaned over, his hand still on her belly, and pressed his forehead to hers. He was not just a husband. He was not a survivor. He was, finally, just Eli. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to hear from you. Please comment and tell us where you are listening from. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West and share your thoughts with us in English.